Hello, and you're watching the History Fella channel. In this video we're looking at the Evans gang. John and George Sontag were the owners of a quartz mine in Visalia, California for a number of years, but in 1892, when the quartz started to peter out, they decided to sell up and move on. They met up with Christopher Evans, a farmer who was struggling to make ends meet, and the two brothers moved in with Evans and his family in their tiny farmhouse. This proved to be the catalyst for the forming of a violent and vicious gang that came to be known as the Evans gang. Evans had started his farm when the railroad announced their intentions to run their tracks past the little town of Visalia in the hope of using the railroad to his advantage. But it was not to be, and the railroad ended up 10 miles away, turning the already quiet little town into almost a ghost town. It was around this time that the train robbery started, and almost all were credited to the Dalton gang. When the train had been stopped, dynamite was used to blow open the express cars, and on 2 occasions passengers were killed when they stuck their heads out of the windows of their carriages to see what was going on. The gang members were never identified, despite other passengers giving quite detailed descriptions of the robbers. With financial desperation setting in, Christopher Evans and Sontag brothers decided to turn their hands to robbing trains themselves. Evans himself had no qualms about robbing the railroad, thinking they had let him and his family down badly by not bringing the railroad track close to his farm, as they had originally planned. The gang held up the Southern Pacific Railroad train as it neared Visalia, and one of the passengers interviewed by the sheriff after the robbery was George Sontag. He gave the sheriff a vivid account of the robbery and a false description of some of the robbers, in an effort to throw them off the scent. However, the train's conductor knew George Sontag and had not seen him amongst the passengers during the trip, but only after the hold-up. Wells Fargo detectives were quickly on the scene of the hold-up and followed the tracks of a cart from the scene to the Evans ranch. It was decided to lay a trap for the gang, and so the sheriff's office, going along with George Sontag's account of the robbery, asked him to come to Visalia to identify a suspect. The moment he turned up, he was arrested and thrown into jail. A large posse then went to Evans' place with the intention of arresting the remaining members of the gang. However, word had reached Evans, and before the posse could surround the house, the barn doors flew open, and Chris Evans and John Sontag opened fires with their shotguns. By the time the shooting had stopped and the posse had time to reorganize themselves, the 2 gang members were long gone. They left behind 1 dead deputy sheriff and 3 badly wounded ones, whilst they themselves had escaped unharmed. The 2 were now on the run with rewards on their heads for capture, dead or alive. Over the next year, the 2 of them continued to rob stagecoaches and stores, and all the time the reward on them grew until it reached $10,000. Surprisingly, they were harboured by a number of people to whom $10,000 was a fortune, but who never attempted to collect the reward. Whether or not this was through some misguided loyalty or fear, it is not known. But it is suspected that on 2 occasions, when a posse arrived and questioned the owners of the homes where the 2 robbers had visited, they were actually asleep in the house at the time. The posses came close to the Outlaws a number of times, and shots were exchanged, resulting in a number of lawmen being wounded, but never the pursued robbers. Then came a breakthrough. An informer said that the 2 men were heading for a hideout that had been used at the place called Sampson Flats. There was a cabin at the foot of a hill in which the sheriff's men hid for 3 days. They were just about to give up when the 2 men appeared. With the trap about to be sprung, the 2 outlaws sensed something was wrong, and as the deputies opened fire, the men dove behind a pile of manure. In the ensuing gunfight, which lasted most of the day, just one of the deputies was hit. At dusk, Chris Evans staggered away from the manure pile, bleeding heavily from a number of gunshot wounds, whilst nothing was heard from John Sontag. The posse decided to wait until morning before venturing out, and then found John Sontag between the manure behind the manure pile, dying from his wounds. Evans, in the meantime, had been captured and taken to jail. He was later sentenced to prison for life. John Sontag died where he'd been made his last stand. When his brother heard of his death, he tried to escape from prison and was shot dead.